Good evening, everyone. I'm Allie Rosenberg, one of the co-chairs of the Town of Newcastle Holocaust and Human Rights Committee. On behalf of my co-chair, Stacy Science, the Town of Newcastle, our committee, and the students of E.N.O.U.G.H, I'd like to welcome you to tonight's Yom HaShoah Holocaust Remembrance Ceremony. Tonight's program will run for about 40 minutes, and now we will begin with a song performed by cantorial soloist Allie West.
Eli, Eli, shelo yigamer le'olam, hakol v'chayam, rishrush shel hamayim, berak hashamayim, tfilat ha'adam, hachol v'chayam, rishrush shel hamayim, berak hashamayim, tfilat ha'adam. Oh Lord, my God, I pray that these things never end. The sand and the seas, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart, the sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart.
Thank you, Allie. Good evening. I am Stacy Science, and I would like to welcome Jeremy Salam, Newcastle's Deputy Town Supervisor.
Thank you, Stacy. I want to start off by thanking Stacy and Allie as well, co-chairs of the Newcastle Holocaust and Human Rights Committee, as well as the students of E.N.O.U.G.H, whose inspirational efforts, compassion, and a sense of responsibility are not just a catalyst for one of these events tonight, but our memorial in town as well in the hamlet of Chappaqua. I also understand, and if I can't see you, I apologize who everyone is listed, but County Executive George Latimer, State Senator Peter Harcum, Assemblyman David Buchwald, and Mount Kisco Mayor Gina Piccinich, who are joining us as well. And in town, we have Supervisor Ivy Poole and my fellow town board members, Lisa Katz, Lauren Levin, Jason Lichtenthal, and our Administrator Jill Shapiro. Yom HaShoah is abbreviated, and it's actually a longer name, and it translates into Day of Remembrance of the Holocaust and the Heroism. So to state it another way, Yom HaShoah reminds us that not only can we never forget the hate-driven atrocities of the Holocaust, but also the courage that people displayed, people no different than any one of us who stood up against the Nazi genocide. And simply, it may not be the most appropriate term, but simply, but for many selfless heroes whose names and faces we may have lost to history, there would have been far more, countless, actually, men, women, and children who would have passed or been taken elsewhere by the fascist regime in Nazi Germany. And while Yom HaShoah is a day we emphasize and rightfully do so for those who passed and those whose lives were stolen and suffered, I think it's important that we also acknowledge that second piece I just mentioned before is heroism, and that each one of us has to do our part no matter what the circumstances. So those folks who rose to the occasion need to be acknowledged as well. I think it's safe to say, and we all would agree, that we can't allow ignorance to ever triumph over tolerance. We can't remain complicit and allow the demonization of any person, no matter what their ethnic background is, their racial, religious, no matter the reason. But we also can't fail to recognize that as individuals, whether by ourselves or united with others, we can make a difference, not just to make it safer today, but for tomorrow. I'd have to say, and again, I think most would agree that there are still flames of bigoted ignorance that still rage, not just in this nation, but really as a wildfire, and extremism both in our country and abroad. And while it may be easier for us to ignore it if it doesn't impact us immediately, you don't need to look any further than the news. You can go to the Anti-Defamation League website. You can see what's peddled online, misinformation. And there's lots of hate and a lot of discrimination. Some of us have suffered it firsthand. But no matter how we see it burning, no matter where it is, we all have a responsibility to extinguish that flame and make sure that those embers, that hate, never ignites another Birkenau or Auschwitz, or for that matter, anything remotely similar. Our today is certainly nothing like it was in 1930 or 1940s Germany or Europe in general. But I also have no doubt that those heroes who saved countless people back during the Holocaust and the sacrifices that they made would be very proud of what is being exhibited by many people today. And again, it doesn't have to be genocide, it doesn't have to be bombs. We can rise to the occasion to help our fellow men and women in much different circumstances. In our community in Newcastle, and certainly far beyond, in the hospitals throughout the city, state, and country, hour after hour, day after day, we see heroism. We see people fighting the COVID-19 pandemic as people in supermarkets, people who are EMTs, our police officers, our first responders. And while some of us have seen the ignorant rhetoric attacking those of Asian descent, we've seen reckless information spread across the internet. We've seen people rise to the occasion and sew masks. We've seen people here in this town, in fact, put together north of $100,000 to feed hospital workers who are our heroes, just like those individuals who volunteered their time and efforts. But whether you're home or whether you're at work, whether you're, quote, essential or not, we all have to do our part. We all have to be a part of the solution, and we all can be heroes. We don't need unrivaled danger. As I said before, we don't need bombs and fear. We can all rise to the occasion. And that, in large part, is what Yom HaShoah is about. So I remind you never to forget the Holocaust, never be afraid to stand up to intolerance and hate, and never forget that every one of us, each one of us, has the ability to overcome adversity, both individually and as a group, to stand up with others and be a hero. And a hero can mean many different things for many different people. And I'm grateful that as horrible as COVID-19 is right now, and as horrible as things in the past have gone, with the Holocaust and other hate crimes and genocides, that we can still rise to the occasion. So thank you very much. I now would like to hear from the co-presidents of the Horace Greeley High School Student Club, E.N.O.U.G.H.
Thank you for joining us tonight to commemorate Yom HaShoah. My name is Sam Rosenberg.
And I'm Charlie Gordon.
Yom HaShoah is about reflecting on the past and using those lessons to help create a better future. Recently, hate has become acceptable. It would be so easy to turn our backs and ignore the hate. But that's what happened 75 years ago. Yom HaShoah is a chance for us to remember and to teach that hate is not acceptable. The mission of our club, E.N.O.U.G.H, which stands for Educate Now on Understanding Genocide and Hate, is to empower students to stand up to hate and to develop a community of tolerance through education and the understanding of people's differences. As the next generation, we understand that we have a responsibility to listen to the stories of the Holocaust, to retell these stories, and to educate each other.
Elie Wiesel once asked, why write the memories of the Holocaust? Why share the experiences of the Holocaust? For the dead, it's too late. His answer, because it is never too late for our children. This year, we are so proud to have launched our first annual art and writing contest for middle school and high school students. We are so pleased with the large number of outstanding submissions, and we thank all of our students for participating. Now we would like to introduce Sam Mikesell, Rachel Kiles, and Pat Pollock, who serve on the Town of Newcastle Holocaust and Human Rights Committee, who will announce the winners of our first annual art and writing contest.
On behalf of the committee, I would like to thank all of the students for their submissions because they were all outstanding. And it was very difficult to choose a winner because they were wonderful. But without further delay, Sam will introduce the winners of the middle school art contest.
Hi, I'm Sam Mikesell. and I serve on the Town of Newcastle Holocaust and Human Rights Committee. And I'm also a member of E.N.O.U.G.H. And the winners in the middle school art contest are first place Ryan Zhang, third place Abby Bassell, and the honorable mention was Juliana D'Onofrio.
Hi, I'm Rachel Kiles. I am the co-liaison for the Club E.N.O.U.G.H, and I will now announce the winners of the high school art contest, which in second place is Colin Dunn, and in first place is Gwendolyn Toll.
Sorry.
If Tatum Walsh is on, you're welcome to read your prompt for your piece of artwork.
Thank you. I think the main reason why we should remember the Holocaust is to make sure we never do it again. If we remember the suffering, discrimination, and hatred put towards these people, we are definitely less likely to do it again. My drawing shows a group of kids with sad faces behind lines of barbed wire. I think it represents how these kids never got the same opportunities as others, such as an actual education. This time period and other horrific events in history should be remembered, so we remind ourselves to treat other people as equals and the way we want to be treated, a lesson we have learned since we were young.
Gwendolyn, if you're on and you would like to read your prompt.
Thank you. In the years leading up to the Holocaust, the objective of the Nazi Party was to remove Jewish history and culture from the face of the earth. The Nazis dehumanized the Jewish community, making them look like subhumans who pose a threat to the purity of the Third Reich. In my drawing, I depicted people with faces that were covered, disfigured, and undefined, showing how the memory of the Jewish people was slowly being degraded and manipulated. It is crucial that we remember the true faces of those who suffered from the inhumane genocide that was the Holocaust. If we don't, then we help fulfill the goals of their oppressors.
Thank you. Pat Pollock is going to announce the winners of the middle school writing contest.
And the winners of the middle school writing contest are honorable mention, Ryan Zhang, third place, Ariel Goldner, second place, Zoya Nabil, first place, Elliot Sions, and Elliot will now read his essay.
A treacherous place where mothers and their children are separated, their cries for each other echoing throughout the camp. Wise, once respected men starving, barely alive in their skin and bone physique, all derived from one man's hate and a country's need for a scapegoat. One man was able to convince a large, respectable country to blame the Jews for all their problems. It was just a small buildup of hate, a steady increase that led millions of Jews to their demise at the camps. It started small. Jews can't go to this restaurant or use that park. Jews can't go here or there. Ever so slowly, they built up on that. Jews can't marry non-Jews. Jewish children can't go to school with non-Jewish children. Eventually, it led to the point where the German people stood behind the extermination of everyone in the religion. This shows how vital it is to stand up against hate, no matter how small. If we don't remember what happened in the Holocaust and don't stand up against hate, it could, no, it will repeat itself. In our world today, there are so many examples of hate. Some acts seem much smaller, like calling COVID-19 the Chinese virus. But such seemingly insignificant acts of hate, especially coming from influential figures, can lead to a much more extreme and widespread hate. The Holocaust started from one politician blaming problems on the Jews. What's the difference when one politician blames a global pandemic on a foreign race? We must ask ourselves, where could this hate lead? If we don't stop these people, stand up against their hate, how is it not our fault when such hate happens on a larger scale?
And now the winners of the high school writing contest are honorable mention, Ting Ting Chung, third place, Sarah McShane, second place, Lizzie Osinski, first place, Hannah Ullman, and Hannah will now read her essay.
Hi, I titled my essay, The Significance of My Jewish Identity. I never truly understood how significant the ties between my religion and my identity were until I traveled to Poland in 2018 to learn about and immerse myself in the tragedies that occurred during the Holocaust. After walking through Auschwitz, wandering through graveyards in the Warsaw Ghetto, and absorbing the dreadful propaganda in the Poland Museum of the History of Polish Jews, I felt a connection to my religion running through my veins and a weight that I thought could never be lifted from my heart. I carried a feeling of remorse with me, not only because I had not known more about my people, but because I noticed that if a 14-year-old Jewish girl knew so little about her past, how would others know about it? I realized then that witnessing these acts of hatred gives me an obligation to teach others about it. From this self-discovery, I understood that remembering the dehumanization and mass extermination of Jews is not enough. To fully acknowledge this permanent stain on humanity, we have the responsibility to ensure that no other religion, race, ethnicity, gender, or any other human being faces this prejudice. In Poland, I forced myself to confront some of the darkest moments of history. I found myself in Auschwitz, my snow boots treading the same paths as the starving Jews in blue and white striped pajamas trudging towards their murder and gas chambers. In my warm winter coat, I stood in the same place that innocent Jewish families were stripped naked before being brought to an execution yard, where babies, mothers, fathers, and girls just like me were shot dead 80 years ago solely for the fact that they shared a religion, my religion, Judaism. I felt guilty for being born after this, being able to wear snow boots and a warm winter coat, having the freedom to live without the extreme anti-Semitism before me and escaping death, which my great-great-uncle was not fortunate enough to do. Avram Yoin Rosenblum's ashes, like many others, were scattered into the soil I stepped on after his body underwent mass cremation in the furnaces behind me. Walking through Auschwitz is like walking through a ghost town. I could easily close my eyes and picture the people beside me, the coldness constricting me, and the darkness reaching towards me. It felt real. The process in which Jews were sent to their death is especially despicable. Jews were gathered from ghettos and towns all throughout Eastern Europe and put onto trains with the promise of a new life. They were given fake jobs for factories and fake leases for acres of land. They packed plates and forks into their suitcases. They were told after numerous days on a packed trains that they would get to shower. Once they got off the train at Auschwitz, prisoners went through a selection process where children, the elderly, and those unsuited for work were sent straight to the gas chambers. At gunpoint, they were ordered to strip naked in front of thousands of people and stood in front of falsely labeled shower rooms. They were sent into the gas chambers with shower heads, and instead of water, they were showered with poisonous gas. It took 15 to 20 minutes for them to die. It is hard to imagine the stench, the panic, and the terrified children. I walked into an Auschwitz exhibit where hundreds of decayed suitcases were piled on top of one another and paused when I saw my name written amongst the others. The last name Ullman was painted on a faded mahogany suitcase. The name Max is written in all capital letters underneath the subtle variation of my last name. I looked at the names written in paint on the mundane colors of blacks and browns on the luggage. Some names are delicately drawn in cursive, others in big blockish letters. It saddened me that I recognized some of these names: Klein, Israel, Cohen. However, what was even more horrifying was the exhibit in the room ahead of me. The room was filled with 2 tons of Jewish hair, only a fraction of the 11 tons that were used to make textile and furniture cushions in German factories. There was a full room of Jewish hair, shaved off from those who were murdered in Auschwitz. It was indescribably painful to witness. I knew that this was the worst of humanity, the dehumanization, the genocide of people, not only Jews, but also including, but not limited to, Poles in the resistance movement, gay and disabled people, whose only crime was being different from a German ideal. After my trip to Poland, I finally understood that being Jewish means understanding our past, but also that teaching others about it is just as important.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you to all of the winners. We just want to say a big congratulations. And then Hannah, we also want to say happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
This year marks the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. I was privileged to attend the anniversary commemoration in Poland earlier this year with 105 Auschwitz survivors, including Michael Bornstein. Michael was just 4 years old when the Russians liberated him from Auschwitz. We are honored to welcome Michael Bornstein and his daughter, Debbie Hollenstadt, to share Michael's story with us tonight. Thank you.
Good evening. I want to thank my wife for turning computer on and get me set up because I couldn't do it myself. I want to thank the organizers and my friend Stacy for inviting us here to join you. For a long time, I didn't talk about my childhood. I wasn't sure if anyone really cared to talk about the past. So thank you for caring. I'm a New Yorker just like you. I immigrated to the United States in 1951 at the age of 11. Back then, I kept my sleeve rolled down to hide my tattoo on my arm. I was embarrassed about my past. I was different than the other kids in my class at PS6 in Manhattan, and I just wanted to focus on the future. But things have changed over the past few years. There's been a rise in anti-Semitism and hate crimes against all minority groups, including African Americans, Hispanics, LGBT minorities, and there are also fewer survivors to tell their stories. It feels like people are forgetting what happens when bigotry and hatred go ignored. I can't stay silent anymore. I was born into a ghetto, ZARKI, in Poland on May 2nd, 1940. So I guess I'm going to have a birthday pretty soon too. I had a brother, a father, mother, and many aunts and uncles. My mother was one of 7 siblings. German soldiers would come to our home and demand money and jewelry. So my dad created a vault in the backyard to bury what he could. We were ultimately taken to Pionki labor camp, and then in 1944 to Auschwitz. I was 4 years old at the time, and I was prisoner B1148. Let me show you my tattoo, if you can see it. Trust me, it's there. I was separated from my mother, my father, my big brother Samuel, and my grandmother Dora. And I was put into a children's bunk.
So I always knew that my dad had a tattoo on his arm in the 1970s and 1980s when I was growing up. My dad didn't talk about the Holocaust. And my siblings and I, we would ask sometimes questions, and my dad was a master at changing the subject. So much so that when I graduated college, I traveled Europe for a month, and I called my dad from a payphone back then and said, our next stop, my girlfriend and I, our next stop is Poland, and we're going to go see Auschwitz. And my dad said, Debola, I don't ever ask you anything, but I'm asking you, do not go. I do not want you to go. My dad really just, he worked hard to create that life you see there in the picture, this happy world for my siblings and I, and he didn't want us to see anything else but what he had built. A few years ago, though, my dad's mindset started to change. He started talking, and I started researching. ZARKI was one of the first towns invaded when the war started. There were food shortages, forced labor, and cruel killings. My dad's father, his name was Israel Bornstein, my grandpa, Israel Bornstein, was selected to be president of the JUDENRAT. That's like a liaison, it's a go-between the Nazis and the Jewish people. And my grandpa Israel devised a bribery scheme that saved hundreds, and actually by one survivor's account, a survivor who's still alive today, that survivor says he saved thousands of lives with this bribery scheme. But he could not save his own. My dad's father and brother, and you see him there, Israel Bornstein, his father, were killed in the gas chambers at Auschwitz.
I might have died there too, but my mommy, my mother, smuggled me into the women's bunk. She and my grandmother kept me hidden under piles of straw. While they worked, they shared their bread with me. People always ask what I remember. Again, I was only 4 years old. It's hard to separate what I know, what my family members, my mother told me. I do remember the foul smell, the disgusting smell that I later found out burning flesh. I remember voices shouting at me in German. And my grandmother and I would sneak out of the bunk to look in trash cans for moldy potato skins to eat. I remember my mother crying. She was moved eventually to an Austrian labor camp and had to leave me behind in Auschwitz, hiding.
So when Soviet soldiers came in, that was January 27th, 1945, when they came in and finally liberated Auschwitz, my dad was there. And I'm going to play you this archival footage.
Dr. Mengen suchten sich unter ihnen eine bestimmte Kategorie aus. Alle, die Sie hier als Überlebende sehen, sind Zwillinge.
And that's my dad on the bottom right of your screen, the little boy showing his tattoo.
Sie wissen nicht, wie Sie heißen. Sie kennen Ihre Familie nicht. Nur
So when they were liberated, my dad and his grandmother Dora, she took him she is holding him. She took him back to ZARKI, expecting to find nobody. But a short while later, my dad's mom, my grandma Sophie, returned. And honestly, she never really got over the shock. I mean, the miracle, the fact that my dad had lived, that he survived Auschwitz. She found him. She was surprised also to see that he was living in a chicken coop. The family home had been taken over by another family. And she was surprised by something else too. So my dad had mentioned that his mom, my grandma Sophie, was one of 7 siblings. And they all made different decisions during the war about, nobody knew, which way led to survival. So her little sister was in the Warsaw Ghetto, Majdanek death camp, Skarżysko, Buchenwald, and then was led on a death march out of Buchenwald. Another sister trekked across Siberia and got paperwork from Chuni Sugihara and made it all the way to Japan. Several of the brothers tried going into hiding, and all 7 siblings survived.
They all survived.
Which is another unexplainable, I guess, kind of a miracle. This photo shows some of them. It's my grandma Sophie on the top right. In the middle is her little sister who was in all those camps and on the death march. Her brother next to her, and her little niece with the bow. And that's my father there. You see the little boy who's bald on the bottom left. He suffered such severe malnourishment that even after liberation, he had a difficult time growing hair. So ultimately, my grandma Sophie went to Munich, Germany to try to get him better medical treatment and also to wait. They waited for 6 years to make it to America.
Thanks, Debola. I got a scholarship to Fordham University where I earned a pharmacy degree. Then I got a PhD in pharmaceutics and analytical chemistry from the University of Iowa. And I got another thing from the University of Iowa, and that's my wife, Judy, who's sitting next to me.
Hello, Mom.
Can you see her?
We see you.
We've been married for 53 years now, and Judy and I have 4 wonderful kids, 12 grandkids, and my family is really everything to me.
You can look at this photo 2 different ways. From one survivor, there's all of this. 6 million Jewish people were killed. 6 million people. Each one should have had this. Each one deserved all of this. What would have been today? But we also look at this photo and we think, how blessed, what a blessing from one survivor. There is all of this. We are 22 in that photo, 22 when we get together, if we could only get together. We're 22 on Zoom this year for Pesach. And when we celebrate Simchas, happy occasions, we always have something really special they're with us. My dad mentioned earlier that there was, his family had buried things in the backyard at the start of the war. They had like a makeshift vault in the backyard. After the war, the family home had been taken, but my grandma Sophie would not leave ZARKI without sneaking into that backyard and looking for that vault. And she dug and she dug and she finally found it. And she discovered that everything had been stolen, vandalized, except for one thing.
And that one thing is this Kiddush cup. It's a cup that is normally used for blessings on the Sabbath, but it's also been used for my wedding, my children's weddings, bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs, and many other happy occasions. So another thing that my mother gave me was this watch. It's an IWC watch, and on the back there's a Hebrew inscription, and there's a Gimel and a Zion, and it stands for Gam Ze Ya'avor, which means this too shall pass. And I know this is a very difficult time with the virus, but remember Gam Ze Ya'avor, this too shall pass. And we talk at children's schools a lot and churches, and sometimes they don't have such good days. And I want to remind them, Gam Ze Ya'avor, this too shall pass, and there'll be brighter days in the future.
And if you're looking for a few reasons, especially with everything going on, to feel inspired tonight, I'll share just two more things that stunned us during this book writing journey when we were working on my father's memoir. So I wanted desperately to find something tangible for him to remember his brother by. We didn't have a photo of him. We didn't have a birth certificate. And I was successful in finding like everybody's birth certificate and birth information except for Samuel's, my dad's brother, along the way. But about 2 weeks before the book was published, I was in contact with a researcher in the northern UK who had a connection to a man whose dad owned the only photography studio in the area before, during, and after the war. And after reviewing hundreds and hundreds of negatives, we finally found this. This is a photo of my dad's brother Samuel and his mom Sophie.
Yes, I had this photo blown up. I framed it, and I really cherish it. It means a lot to me.
And one last stunner for us, right after Survivors Club was published, someone reached out to my dad and she said, I'm the little girl sitting next to you at Liberation on the front of your book. It's seen on the front of your book. And on the very same day, we actually found out about another woman who was seated next to my father at Liberation. And long story short, these three were reunited, Sarah Ludwig, Tova Friedman, and my father. They could have settled anywhere in the entire world after that day, after Liberation. And would you believe they have been living just miles apart here in New Jersey for decades and didn't know it. And so I guess just it's a reminder to me, and I hope to you too, that there's little miracles everywhere. And as my dad said, it's a difficult time, but we hope that we leave you with my father. If you have picked up anything from him, I know it's hard on Zoom, it's that he carries this sort of eternal optimism, and I hope you feel some of that tonight. So we thank you so much for caring and for being here on Zoom, and dealing with the technical challenges of all of us.
Thank you for listening.
Michael and Debbie, thank you for sharing your incredible story with us. As Elie Wiesel said, to listen to a witness is to become a witness. Tonight, we are all witnesses. Now, we'd like to hear words from the County Executive, George Latimer.
Well, thank you very much. I'm listening as everyone else is and very moved by the personal stories of what it was like to be a little boy in Auschwitz. And I don't think I can add any particular wisdom to the conversations except to say that I view the act of remembrance of these things as separate and distinct from the act of never forgetting. The never forgetting is a proactive action. That's us in this day, never tolerating when a government starts to diminish people, starts to make things that are unusual commonplace, when they start to demean people and it becomes acceptable. So that is what our mission is going forward, and I'm glad that even with COVID-19 at hand, we're all together tonight.
Thank you, County Executive Latimer. Thank you so much for joining us and for your words. Tonight, now we will light 6 candles in memory of the 6 million Jews and millions of other victims who were persecuted and murdered simply because of who they were and what they believed.
I would like to welcome Rabbi Bergman, Rabbi Brusso, Rabbi Greenberg, Rabbi Jaffe, Rabbi Navarez, and Rabbi Sachs, who will lead us in the Mourner's Kaddish.
Gadal Lotz, V'yit Gadash Gurs, Shmei Rabbah Warsaw.
Yalma Divrach Yurte, Bogdanovka, Biamlich Malchute, Ravensbrück, V'chayechon, V'yomechon, Vilna, Uvchaye Dechol Beit Yisrael, Treblinka.
Ba'agala, Uvizman Kariv, Chelmo, V'imru Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabbah Vorach Leolam Ulalmei Almaya.
Yitbarach V'yishtabach Elchek V'yitba'ar V'yitramam Buchenwald V'yitnaseh V'yitadar Sobibor V'yitale V'yitalal Majane Shmei B'Kudashah B'Rechu Malthausen
Le'ala Babiyar Mikol Berchata V'Shirata Bergen-Belsen Tushbachata V'Nechemata Dachau Damiran Be'alma Auschwitz V'imru Amen.
Yehi Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya V'chayim Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen. Osei Shalom B'mromav Hu Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen.
I'd like to welcome Reverend Dr. Jacobs and Reverend Kenny read First They Came.
First they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist.
Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me.
Thank you, Reverends. We thank you so much for joining us tonight. Your participation ensures that the world will never forget.
As we conclude tonight's ceremony, I ask you to stand up, turn your cell phone flashlight on, and hold your cell phone up high. As Alan Holt said last week at the conclusion of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum's Days of Remembrance, light your cell phone as if it were a candle, lift it high as a symbol to survivors, but also to us, the new generation that will shape the future of humanity. Let's say together, we will never forget.
We will never forget.
We would like to conclude this evening with a song performed by Cantor Herman and Cantor Sternly.
Ani ve'ata. It's been said before, but it doesn't matter. Ani ve'ata, you and I will change the world. You and I will change the world, and everyone else will follow. Ani ve'ata nishaneh et haolam. אני ואתה, אז יבואו כבר כולם. אמרו את זה קודם לפניי, לא משנה. אני ואתה נשנה את העולם.
אני ואתה ננסה מההתחלה, יהיה לנו רע, אין דבר, זה לא נורא. אמרו את זה קודם, לפניי זה לא משנה. אני ואתה נשנה את העולם. אני ואתה נשנה את העולם.
Thank you, Cantors. Thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. Please be safe, stay healthy, and have a good night.